Hi, Honey Family. Welcome back to another episode. I grew up in eastern Kentucky, and we're a coal mining area. As a result, we have a lot of trains and a lot of train tracks. I've always been fascinated with ghosts and hauntings and just the lore surrounding train tracks. If you look across the whole country, you'll see that almost every place that has train tracks, which is most places, has some ghost stories attached to them. Stick around to the end of the episode for a little local story about something interesting that happened on some train tracks here. Sit back and enjoy the show. Story 1. Warning on the tracks. My husband and I were living in Vancouver, Washington. We lived there from 1996 to about 2001. In the last 2.5 years we lived there, we rented an old house in a small town a few miles east of Vancouver. It runs along the Columbia River, which has a lot of history to it, besides all the haunted history of Fort Vancouver. Now, the house was about 80 years old. It's a two-story house that at one time had been made into a duplex. The upstairs had been made into a one-bedroom apartment with a little kitchen and a living room, a bathroom, but they had taken all the appliances out, and the landlord was renting it out as a two-story, one-family house. The day I got the key to the house, I took my friend out to see it. It was completely empty. The previous renters had completely moved out. We were in the living room, and I heard a woman's voice say something. I couldn't hear exactly what it was, but I asked my friend if she had heard it also. She shook her head and said no. I felt kind of weird, but just ignored it, excited to move into my cute farmhouse. The very first night we spent there, I was having trouble sleeping. The house was 1 block over from a railroad track, which we were not aware of when we agreed to rent the place. The railroad crossing was on the next road, so the train always blasted the warning horn, and would do so at least 2 times every night. It was very annoying. So the first night, I'm lying there, my husband is asleep beside me, and I hear a woman's voice, talking in a different language. It only lasted for about 30 seconds, and it sounded like it was probably French. It really freaked me out. I was so scared, and my heart was pounding so hard. I think that is actually what woke my husband up. He sat straight up in bed and looked at me with this weird look on his face. That's when we noticed our dog, who had been in the backyard, was at the foot of our bed. We got up, and the back door was open. We thought that maybe we just hadn't closed it tight, and that he had pushed it open. The other weird thing is that for the first couple months we lived there, every night, when I would just be drifting off to sleep, I would feel the top of my hair being stroked. This was really uncomfortable. Finally, I asked the spirit, her, to stop, and she did. I did not like the upstairs at all. My cat would bolt upstairs at lightning speed and stay up there for hours. One time, I followed her up there. She was sitting in the room the farthest away, of course, and was in the corner just staring at me. All of a sudden, all of the blinds in that room blew out like wind had passed through the whole house. I got out of there so fast. Since our bedroom was downstairs, I had no reason to be up there. I literally went upstairs 3 or 4 times. In the 2.5 years we lived there, I was very uncomfortable being alone in the house. But eventually, I forced myself to get over this. I started to talk to my husband about my feelings, and he was having the same things happen to him. One night, he was asleep in the living room, on the couch, facing the back of the couch, when he said he felt the strong presence of a woman. He turned around because he thought I was standing behind him, and of course, I wasn't there. No one was there. I saw the outline of a person walk out of my bedroom into the kitchen one night while I was watching TV. My husband was in the bedroom at the time, watching TV, but he wasn't the one who walked out of the bedroom and into the kitchen. He also said that sometimes he would wake up in the middle of the night and hear talking in the living room, like he'd left the TV on or something. He would go check, and the TV and the radio would be off. Our bed would shake, like how it does when a cat jumps on it, but the cat would be nowhere around. One time he was driving early in the morning for work, and he had to cross the railroad crossing that only has signs, no light. It was foggy and just barely light out. He said suddenly he saw an old man swinging an old-fashioned lantern in the road, so he stopped, and suddenly there was a train going by. No warning horn, nothing. Just suddenly a train. When the train had passed, the old man was gone. He couldn't see him walking down the road. Nothing. He just vanished. Story 2. Haunted Tracks. The story was that a school bus full of children, back in the 1930s or 40s, had stalled on the tracks, and the bus driver tried in vain to get the bus going again. 10 children were killed when the train collided with the bus. The story I heard was that you could drive to the location, shut your car off with the engine in neutral, and the ghosts of the children would push your car up and over the tracks. Out of danger. I had to try this for myself. I have a black car, a station wagon, and decided to take talcum powder and sprinkle it over the back of my car to see if any handprints would show up. There were 2 carloads of us going. Me, my 2 daughters, my husband, and my sister, her 2 children, and her boyfriend in her car. She has a white car. I arrived at the site first and was so anxious to try it. I wiped down the back of my car so there'd be no fingerprints, no dust, no dirt, nothing. I sprinkled the talcum powder and put my car on the other side of the tracks. I put my car in neutral, took my foot off the pedals, and the car moved. It moved quickly towards the tracks, up over the bump and down the other side, well out of harm's way. I was so excited I got out of the car and ran around to the back, and there were tiny little handprints, plain and clear, and so tiny. The prints were so perfect you could see the lines of the palms and the swirls of the fingerprints. We were so shocked. And then the 4 of us heard children's voices, loud and clear, like children playing on a school ground. We listened in amazement, and it just stopped abruptly. This place is very rural, and it wasn't anybody near us. We had heard the children. I wanted to try it again, so I wiped off the handprints and put new talcum powder on the car and tried it again, this time with only me in the car. My kids stood behind the car, hoping to see a ghost or something, and my husband stood in front of the car, now scared and not wanting to be in the car. This time the car went even faster. I heard the tailgate of my station wagon squeak when it was being pushed up and over the hill again. I got out, and there were several little handprints, not only on the back of the car, but down the sides towards the back doors. And there was one big handprint on the side. Could this have been the handprint of the bus driver? That's what we think, at least. By this time, my sister and her family had arrived, and they wanted to try it. The same thing happened to her car, but of course we didn't bother powdering it since she had a white car. When her car was pushed over, we were shocked. No handprints, but there was little red droplets, almost like blood, all over her trunk. They continued down the sides, and there were even droplets on the inside of her car, where her daughter had her window down. We were all in shock. None of us, except for my husband, was scared. It's not scary. It's just very sad and somber out there. I had an incredible feeling of sadness. Before leaving, I felt like I had to walk down among the trees and bushes that lined the little road. So I did. About halfway down the road, I heard terrible sobbing, gut-wrenching cries from children. I had to leave. Only 2 of us there heard the sobbing. I will never forget my experience that I had that day. Those poor little children who died that day have obviously vowed not to let anyone else die in that tragic spot. Story 3. That time, a train hit a UFO. So if you listen to our podcast, you've heard us mention this before. We're originally from Paintsville, Kentucky, and one of Paintsville's claims to fame is apparently a UFO hit a train. Now, some don't believe the story, some believe the story. Some think it was completely hoaxed. I think I remember reading somewhere that one of the big UFO sites had confirmed that it was a hoax, but some sites still say it's real. I know people locally who believe that it happened and people locally who believe it didn't happen. I'll start by reading to you from the National UFO Reporting Center's report on this train collision. At exactly 2:47 a.m. on January 14, 2002, while working a coal train en route from Russell, Kentucky to Shelpiana, Kentucky, our trailing unit and first 2 cars were severely damaged as we struck an unknown floating or hovering object. I know it was 2:47 because my watch froze, and to this day, it still shows that time. Along with my watch, the entire electrical system on both locomotives went haywire. Approaching a bend near milepost CMG 42 in an area referred to as the Wild Kingdom for the many different types of animals spotted there, my conductor and I saw lights coming from around the way. This ordinarily means another train is coming and will pass on the other tracks. The outlay of this area is the river, number 1 track, number 2 track, and a straight-up mountainside, carved out for the laying of these tracks. I killed our lights as not to blind the oncoming crew. As we rounded the corner, our onboard computer began to flash in and out. Speed recorder went nuts, and both locomotives died. Our alarm bells began to ring, and that's when we saw the objects. Apparently, scanning the river for something. The objects, at least 3, had several searchlights trained there. The first object hovered 10 to 12 feet above the tracks, metallic silver in color, with multiple colored lights near the bottom and in the middle. No windows or openings of any kind that we could see. Approximately 18 to 20 feet in length and probably 10 feet high. With both engines dead as we rounded the corner, we made little noise. The first object did not respond in time. I estimated we hit that object at 30 miles per hour, with 16,000 tons trailing behind us. It clipped the top of our lead unit and skipped back, slicing a chunk out of our trailing unit and the first 2 coal cars. The other objects vanished into thin air. Our emergency brakes had initiated due to the loss of power, and we stopped approximately 1.5 miles to 2 miles after impact. Our power restored. After we had stopped, we notified our dispatcher, located in Jacksonville, Florida, of what had happened. We were told to inspect the cars to see if they could hold the rail and try to limp to milepost 60, which used to be the Paintsville yard, but it's no longer in full operation. We checked everything out. The cab of the locomotive was demolished and smoking. The second 2 cars looked as if they had been hit with a giant hammer, but they looked like they could hold the rail. We pulled into the Paintsville yard at approximately 5:15 a.m. The huge overhead lights lining the yard were noticeably dark, and the only lights on were from what we assumed were the railroad officials' vehicles parked near the end of the tracks. We pulled to a stop and began unloading our grips off the wounded train. We could hear what sounded like an army of workers immediately begin tending to our train. Vehicle doors slamming, guys running in weird outfits, lights glaring from all directions. The one thing that was missing was railroad officials. A guy named Ferguson shook my hand and asked me to follow him into the old yard office. We did. Once inside, they, and by they I mean I have no idea who these people were, began to ask us 100 questions. They then told us for our own protection we would be medically tested before we could leave. I asked repeatedly to talk to my road foreman or train master, and not only were these requests denied, but they confiscated my conductor's cellular phone. Hours later, we were led outside the old rail yard, and the strange things continued to happen. The 2 locomotives and 2 cars were removed from the rest of the train that we had brought in, and my only guess was parked 4 tracks over, under a huge tent-like structure, buzzing with activity. We were let off property, and told, due to national security, our silence was a matter would be appreciated. We were then put in a railroad vehicle and taken to Martin, Kentucky, where we went through questioning again with railroad officials, and then we were drug tested. After all this, we were sent on to Shelbyana, where we took rest for 8 hours, worked another train back to Russell. Working back, we passed Paintsville. No sign of the engines, cars, tent, people, nothing. Okay, so the CSX rail yard in Paintsville that they said they were brought back to is actually, and if you watched one of my videos, the video is Burial Mounds, Haunted Houses, and Small Town Lore. Like the last few scenes of that video is of the CSX yard in Paintsville, because at one time that was an Adena burial mound. So I know people who said that they drove past early that morning and saw damaged train cars, that said they saw the giant tent, and they thought that was weird because there's usually not a whole lot of activity at the Paintsville CSX yard. And I know people who say that they heard what sounded like a large crash in the middle of that night. But, people misinterpret things. People have mistaken memories. So I don't know. Maybe it's true. Maybe it's not. I do know that this part of Eastern Kentucky has always had a lot of UFO sightings. I remember as a child, it used to be the thing to do if people would go up on a strip mine and they would watch the UFOs in the sky. And they would be moving in just the most amazing ways. So, maybe there's something to it. Maybe there's not. If you actually Google search this, there are some pictures on various websites that are supposedly the train. Well, at least one of the train cars. I don't know. I can't speak for how truthful those websites are or whether those pictures are accurate, but it's an interesting story nonetheless. Thanks for listening. Bye.